Next I'm going to show you the Scotch Gambit. The starting moves of this opening are e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, e takes d4, and bishop c4. In fact, the Scotch Gambit is a deviation from the Scotch opening, which is the fourth move, knight takes d4, instead of bishop c4. Once again, white sacrifices a pawn for fast development. Bishop c5, one of the most logical options for black. Black simply protects his extra pawn and offers white to prove that he has enough for it. White has three major choices. First we'll have a look at knight g5. Then we'll see the short castle, and finally the main line, c3, which will transpose into the Italian. So let's start with knight g5. This aggressive move, which was introduced by one of the leading English players of the late 18th and early 19th centuries, Jacob Henry Sarret, in the beginning of the 19th century, is hardly dangerous for black. Black plays knight h6 and protects f7 pawn. Knight takes f7. That's the well-known exchange operation, which is based on the hanging position of the bishop on c5. This is the main line, but first we'll have a look at deviations from the main line. First of all, bishop takes f7, knight takes f7, knight takes f7 simply transposes to the sixth move, knight takes f7, after king takes f7. So next we're gonna see the sixth move, queen h5. And this is a direct attack on f7 and indirect attack on c5. The point of this move and white's idea behind it is to meet the short castle with bishop takes f7, as black can't recapture on f7 with the knight due to a checkmate on h7. In case of the short castle, black simply plays d6 and enjoys an extra pawn. So bishop takes f7, rook takes f7 is necessary. As we said, knight takes f7 leads to a checkmate. So rook takes f7. And in fact, despite black has to play this way, his position is still better. After knight takes f7. Now the bishop on c5 is hanging. But black has an important intermediate move, bishop b4 check. Now after c3, knight takes f7, c takes b4, knight takes b4, queen d1. This move is necessary as black is threatening with knight c2. b6. Black has obtained 2 pawns for exchange and strong initiative. Thus, one of his ideas is to play bishop a6. The other one is to support the center by means of c5. So even in this line, black is doing better. But we'll see the main line, which is queen e7 instead of the short castle. This way black protects both the f7 pawn and the bishop on c5. This defense had been known since the middle of the 19th century. White plays the short castle. In case of knight takes f7, which is a mistake, black plays bishop b4 check again, against this intermediate check, which moves the bishop from attack of the white's queen. And after c3, knight takes f7, we transpose into the 6th move, knight f7, which we're gonna see later. So we'll see the other deviations from the 7th move, short castle. So we said knight takes f7 is a mistake. f4 is also wrong. This move occurred in a couple of games, including the game von Ekstedt Andersen, Leipzig 1855. And this move is refuted by d5, a strong counterattack in the center. White has to capture the pawn. Then knight b4 with a double attack on d5 and c2. And after queen e2, which protects the pawn on c2 and unpins the e-pawn, black plays bishop g4, attacking the queen, and after knight f3, the spectacular knight f5, with the idea of d3 followed by knight d4. So black takes advantage of the numerable attacks on the and pins along the diagonals and files. So this move virtually decides the game. For instance, e takes f5, knight takes c2 check, the king has to move, black simply takes on e2 and castles. This is the most accurate. So black attacks the queen and delays a capture on a1. Bishop takes f7, d3 check, and knight takes a1 with a decisive material advantage. So now we'll come back to the move short castle. I'll remind you that we looked at alternatives knight takes f7 and f4. Black simply plays d6 with the ideas bishop g4 and knight e5, h3, white stops bishop g4, then knight e5, attacking the bishop on c4, bishop b3, bishop d7, f4. That's the only try, as white is a pawn down. And now black has to play knight c6 with a long castle to follow. And black is better. Instead, bishop b5, which is a mistake, occurred in the game Pinder Anderson Manchester 1857. Knight c6, f5, long castle. Black can ignore an attack on f7, f6, deflecting the g pawn from the knight on h6. Instead, knight takes f7 is just bad. Black captures the knight. Queen takes f7, queen takes f7, bishop takes f7, knight b4, attacking the pawn on c2, knight a3, rook h2 f8, bishop c4, and a typical break in the center, d5, e takes d5, bishop takes f5. With a decisive advantage for black due to numberable threats such as d3, an attack and an attack on c2. So we'll come back to the 12th move, f6, g takes f6, queen takes h6, f takes g5, bishop takes g5, queen e5, bishop takes d8, knight takes d8. And with one pawn for exchange, black's compensation is more than sufficient. In fact, black's position is just better. Now let's have a look at the main line, knight takes f7. So as I said, this is a well-known exchange operation, which is based on the hanging position of the bishop on c5. However, it has been known to favor black thanks to better development. Knight takes f7. Now white usually captures on f7. In case of queen h5, with a double attack on f7 and c5, this move is in fact a mistake due to the intermediate bishop b4 check, which we know already. Queen e7 instead is also good for black. So bishop b4 check, c3, and queen e7, protecting the knight on f7. White captures on b4. In case of bishop takes f7 and massive exchanges, black simply takes the pawn on b4 and after knight a3 plays d5, which leads to a healthy extra pawn for black. So c takes b4, queen takes e4 check, king d1. Now white's idea is rook e1, but black plays g6. This is an important move as white doesn't have a good square for the queen. He has to play knight d2, attacking the black's queen, then queen takes g2, rook e1 check, king f8, and white has nothing better than to trade the queens by means of queen f3. Queen h4 is even worse in view of d5, bishop f1, queen g4 check, with a decisive material advantage. So queen f3, black trades the queens, queen takes f3, knight takes f3, then the typical d5, bishop takes d5, knight takes b4, and black's material advantage promises him better chances.